It's always exciting when a Pokemon receives an alternate form. It's a promise of a new lease on life, and since these alternate forms aren't really beholden to the original's limitations beyond having similar stat spreads, there are plenty of options for wild creativity and a big impactful change. Take for instance how vastly different Alolan Ninetales is from Cantonian Ninetales, or how Giratina Altered and Giratina Origin play very differently despite their base similarity. Today we're going over alternate forms of all kinds that did not really improve their original Pokemon. Of course, these are alternate forms that are basically different Pokemon. We're not talking Pokemons that are aesthetic only changes like East and West Gastrodon. So join us in exploring how and why these unfortunate Pokemon's alternate forms did not help them competitively. But before we start, this video is sponsored by Dimensionals. Dimensionals is a cartoon-inspired roguelike turn-based RPG. Seriously, when are we going to get an actual TV show of this? I'm invested from the opening sequence alone. I was not expecting a roguelike to be this refined in its visuals and its voice acting. Anyways, your grandpa has revealed himself to be the biggest Chad of all time, and is currently 1v1ing the leader of the Spectres, this giant cosmic horror monster. The Spectres have created rifts in several dimensions, and it's up to Koa to assemble a team of Dimensionals to stop them before they corrupt every dimension. As with any roguelike, you get a new skill after every battle, and you need to manage them along with your items so you can play through the campaign. One of my favorite things about this game, along with the aesthetic, is the battle system. It's easy to learn but has no shortage of depth to it. You can be like me who just wants to accumulate as much mana as possible and then dump it all at once, or you can go with a more defensive strategy. It's really up to you, and the skills you get due to RNG, but mostly you. It's a very fun game with a lot of strategy, and I know my competitive audience would appreciate it. So if you want to support the channel and help us produce more content, you can use my code to purchase Dimensionals on Steam. And thank you so much to Dimensionals for sponsoring this video. Cantonian Dugtrio is one of the most infamous Pokemon in history for being so decidedly mediocre, outright bad even, yet wielding the power of Arena Trap so effectively that the ability demonstrated itself to be roughly on par with the universally detested Shadow Tag, resulting in Arena Traps banned from every generation after 3, and even in the 3rd gen, it wasn't without its share of controversy. As such, Dugtrio was quite a busted Pokemon as is. You didn't exactly imagine it as the kind of Pokemon that would need a significant buff. Gen 7's boost to its base attack was a major benefit, but Dugtrio itself was the issue already. Gen 7 also gifted Dugtrio another form, its Alolan form. Now, at the time, Dugtrio and Arena Trap's brokenness was not nearly so widely accepted as the obvious truth it is today. It had yet to be banned from any gen, but it was still a major threat that was difficult to imagine an improvement on. Of course, the regional forms have free reign to go in whatever direction they want, so we could have received a Dugtrio that was entirely different, a fire-ice type or something. Either way, the goal should have been to make a Dugtrio variant that was useful on its own merits, not leveraging Arena Trap. Even before the ability's acceptance as inherently busted, there was no getting around the fact that it and it alone was responsible for Dugtrio's viability. Dugtrio hadn't been useful without the ability since before abilities had existed at all. So was the Dugtrio line finally going to have a non-Arena Trap use for the first time since GSC NU? Well, it seemed possible at first. The first thing you notice about Alolan Dugtrio is, in addition to its usual ground typing, it's also gained Steel. A Dugtrio Excadrill hybrid? Sure, why not? Especially since one of its abilities is Sand Force. What about the rest? Well, it's just as strong as Cantonian Dugtrio at base 100 attack. Okay, that's not great in Gen 7 if there's not something else going on. Base 100 works perfectly for Cantonian Dugtrio because its opponents can't escape from it, meaning it can select situations where that's all it needs. Alolan Dugtrio does not have Arena Trap. So what else does it have going for it? It's actually quite a bit slower than its Cantonian counterpart at base 110. Well, that's not great, and no, the 10 base points it loses in speed getting added to defense doesn't actually do anything for it. Gaining Stab Iron Head and the defensive benefits of Steel typing are nice, but not nearly the fundamental upheaval it's going to need if it wants to succeed, unless it gets a crazy good ability itself. Yeah, so much for that. Sand Force is cool and all, but it's not a viability maker. It needs to be on an already useful Pokemon to make what's basically a Life Orb boost for Ground, Steel, and Rock to be worthwhile under temporary Sand. One of its other two abilities, it shares the useless Sand Veil with Dugtrio. The ability gets banned in perma Sand metas and ignored in others, and its other ability is Tangling Hair. Sure, it's irritating when that happens. That could spell a promising premise for an ability. What does it do? Pokemon that make contact with Alolan Dugtrio have their speed lowered by 1 stage. Okay, sure. Yeah, Alolan Dug wants to take many hits, contact or otherwise. Yeah, right. It's already quite fast, so the minus speed is probably not going to help at all. Somehow Sand Force is the best of the three, which isn't bad in its own right, but it doesn't do anything for Alolan Dug, who is weak and ineffective and just doesn't do anything. Arena Trap Dugtrio is a bona fide uber, so matching its standard was almost definitely going to be a failure for whatever Game Freak came up with. But Alolan Dugtrio doesn't even come close, sitting as it does in Gen 7 PU and untiered in the subsequent 2 generations. It's a shame, especially because its design is so bland and not nearly enough of a departure from the original Dugtrio. Cantonian Raticate is a pitiful Pokemon. Sure, stat facade alongside Guts is cool, but base 81 attack is just not sufficient and wasn't even way back in the day. Yeah, Source Dance and its speed stat is actually pretty decent at base 97, but it isn't enough to overcome pathetic bulk and no resist. The best thing about it is that it gets Flame Wheel, which is cool if you're playing in game because it reminds you of Typhlosion, so you can get a dual Flame Wheel core going in your Heart Gold and Soul Silver adventures because that's neat. Competitively, Raticate is beyond worthless, so the Alolan form wasn't so much welcomed in as it was desperately chased, hoping for any speck of salvation. Didn't come into anything? Well, the half-dark typing is cool, gaining second stab, having that stab be knockoff as well as gaining it on Sucker Punch and a psychic immunity to boot. But somehow Alolan Dugtrio is worse. Its stats genuinely make one sad to look at. How does it have 10 less base attack than its Cantonian counterpart? Oh, and that's not all. It's 20 base points slower. 71 base attack and 77 speed is so dismal, it is kind of astonishing that this was a fully evolved Pokemon made in Generation 7. There are middle stages more menacing. What does it get in exchange? More bulk. Wow, cool. More bulk that it can't do anything with since it's still not anywhere close to being bulky, and its typing is terrible defensively. Yes, even with Thick Fat, giving it fire and ice resist, because it has no utility moves whatsoever. Plus, Thick Fat means it's not using Hustle, but then again, it's pathetically weak even with Hustle. There's no winning with Alolan Raticate. Somehow they managed to make it significantly worse than the Cantonian form. It almost feels purposeful, given how difficult that is, especially with the increasing power-heavy focus of each passing generation. Avalugg is already a brutally flawed Pokemon. Its incredible set of attributes, stratospheric defense, reliable recovery, and the utility of Rapid Spin is offset by packing the worst defensive typing in the game on a Pokemon designed to be a wall. It briefly had a moment of glory in Gen 7 OU, where stall teams used it to wall the unwallable Z-Freeze Shock Kyurem Black, but its pacificity meant it wouldn't and didn't last, relegated back to where it belonged, in the lower tiers, if it manages to be tiered at all. The bar wasn't high for Avalugg's Hisuian form to be an improvement. Plus, the Hisuian forms tended to have a great track record. So, did it wind up being a success? Amazingly, no. Hisuian Avalugg is basically regular Avalugg with less special defense. Fine, it had just about none anyway, and more attack. Okay, that's cool. Its base 127 attack is actually quite impressive. And its Mountain Gale gives it a genuinely powerful stab attack to wield. Hisuian Avalugg also gains more utility with the additional Stealth Rock to its move pool. Well, it's certainly not a downgrade at least. It can only go up, right? Yeah, about that. The whole reason Hisuian Avalugg gets Stealth Rock is because its Ice typing had a partial Rock typing tackled onto it. Hey, at least Avalugg isn't Fire weak anymore, right? But yeah, it also gains a Ground weakness, and a Water weakness, and a Grass weakness, and has its Fighting and Steel weaknesses doubled. Somehow its already abhorrent defensive typing was made worse. No, the Flying and Normal resist it gains as a Rock type do not come close to making up for it. And for any potential viewpoints brewing out there along the lines of, actually there are benefits to Rock typing too, basically, Hisuian Avalugg takes everything bad about Colossian Avalugg and makes it worse. Yes, hitting harder is nice, but it's also hard to hit harder when you're so weak to so much that it's not much of a stretch to say pretty much everything in the game greatly threatens it somehow without even trying. Suffice to say, Hisuian Avalugg was dead on arrival. Let's take things away from strictly regional forms and into the realm of Ubers. Dialga and Palkia had previously ranked among the highest metagame's most elite and essential, but over time, Power Creep's hostility rendered the tier space inhospitable. Dialga became severely outclassed by Duskmane Necrozma, while Palkia's struggle with fairy types became too difficult to justify it, among other reasons. So with the arrival of Origin forms for both of them, just like their Sinnoh compatriot Giratina, there was a real chance for a complete overhaul of their designs. Now, Giratina Altered and Giratina Giratina Origin are completely different Pokemon. Altered is defensively focused with pressure as its ability, whereas Origin is offensively focused with the absolutely game-changing Levitate as its ability. This was the chance for Dialga and Palkia to be reinvented in the same vein. They would transform into their Origin forms in the same way as Giratina, with an item that gave a 20% boost to their stats. The setup was there, but what was the follow-through? For Dialga, practically nothing, and for Palkia, it was a bit more than practically nothing, but in practice, still not nearly sufficient for that drastic revitalization that it required. Origin, Dialga, and Palkia both had their base forms base 120 attack stat, which they seldom use post Gen 4, swapped with one of their base 100 stats. First Dialga, in which case it was special defense. In and of itself, this is absolutely a good change. Greater special bulk is massively helpful for dealing with the litany of special attacks so characteristics of Ubers, like Kyogre, Mewtwo, and various Dracometers. In Gen 9, it seemed to have a promise for taking on Miraidon and Iron Bundle, before the former's ban of course, especially when this change comes at practically no cost, since physical moves are basically never in its move pool with the exception of the occasional Dragon Tail, which isn't really being used for damage anyway, and will even get the boost from Adamant Crystal. Okay, so it got more special defense, what else? That's it? No new ability like Giratina? Basically just her standard Dialga? Yeah, no wonder this didn't do anything for it. The extra special bulk is wonderful, don't get us wrong, but it's not nearly a fundamental enough change to Dialga's whole game to find it even a slight niche. Giratina Altered had 2 stats swapped, both defenses were swapped with its offenses, and it got an amazing new ability. Now, Origin Palkia's stats swap was far more beneficial, as it got its base 20 taken from attack placed into speed, which was nigh ideal. If you're going to be a hard-hitting attacker, you need to pump that speed as much as possible. Giving Palkia Arceus tier speed is a major change and makes it far tougher to deal with. Sadly, it's more than a bit on the late side at this point. Its issue with fairy types remain just as prominent as before, with Arceus Fairy sitting on it happily as always, and furthermore, its speed isn't even that impressive anymore. The fairy type Zacian Crown and Fluttermane harangue it, as does the tier-defining Koraidon. Those are just the very best too. Other tier staples like Shenpao and Iron Bundle get the jump on it too. Like Dialga, Origin Palkia also lacks a new ability that would have breathed life into it. It's just Palkia but faster. This is more meaningful a distinction than Origin Dialga, but it's not significant enough to make it viable, given that its offensive profile is no longer as meta-shattering as it once was. Neither Dialga or Palkia are viable in Gen 9 Ubers, and neither are their Origin forms, which barely distinguish them from those we first met on the Diamond and Pearl box art all those years ago. They have failed to get the Giratina treatment. Here's another choice that differs from the generational forms. In fact, this is the only one on the list that was introduced in the same generation, and it's also an in-battle transformation. It's an unusual choice and almost never thought of, but check this out. When Darmanitan was introduced in Gen 5, it was immediately touted as one of the scariest choice scarfers for Sun teams in OU, as well as generally being excellent without such support post-Sun ban in UU. It had a good speed stat to go alongside a monstrous attack stat whose Flare Blitz was boosted further by its Sheer Force ability, and it even had a good HP stat which minimized the effects of Flare Blitz recoil. It'd be difficult to imagine creating an alternate form for Darmanitan that would top it, but in Gen 8, Galarian Darmanitan did just that with its equally high attack boosted even further by the amazing Guerrilla Tactics ability, and that either gave it a double choice band or let it run choice band and choice scarf simultaneously while wielding ferocious ice stat. It didn't just get sent to Ubers, it also excelled in Ubers. However, Unova Darmanitan has always had another alternate form that has never been quite so successful, though it is both ambitious and extreme. In fact, it's never been seen in serious play at all. It can choose not to run Sheer Force as its ability and instead opt for Zen Mode, which will, when Darm reaches 50% HP, transform it into a different Pokemon. Zen Mode Darmanitan becomes half Psychic and has a complete inversion of its usual playstyle as its base stats are rearranged. Whereas Darmanitan is a brutal physical attacker with solid speed, yet pitiful defenses that mean it is frail even with its large AP, Zen Mode Darmanitan is very slow, going from base 95 to 55, and even more drastically, it becomes a special attacker. Indeed, its attack and special attack stats swap, its base 140 attack becoming 30, and vice versa. It's not just hitting hard specially either, it also possesses superb bulk. Its previously paltry base 55 defenses leaping up to base 105, which is impressive in its own right, but is downright tank worthy alongside base 105 HP. So why didn't this work? Well, the immediacy of Darmanitan Darmanitan as we know it is a major part of its appeal. You just start flare blitzing from the word go, or well, you can U-turn early on to soften opponents up, but that's still being very active. You're not holding back until you get a turn to boost, and then be threatening. Zen Mode, on the other hand, requires getting to half HP before you even exist. Now, with Darm's Stealth Rock weakness, this isn't the most difficult thing to do in the world, but it's still a limitation. Plus, it's not like Darm has any use before it goes Zen Mode, because in order to play to its Zen Mode strength, you have to build it like a special attacker, which is of course useless in its base form. Furthermore, even when you do activate Zen Mode, it's not going to get you anywhere, because it becomes so slow and has a litany of weaknesses easily preyed on, and even its newly impressive bulk isn't going to help it in that regard, since it is starting from half health and has no recovery. It is just patently useless, sadly. Funnily enough, Zen Mode Galarian Darmanitan actually becomes even faster and physically stronger. For Unova Darm though, Zen Mode is not but a fully useless gimmick. And finally, we've got a whole mechanic to discuss. While Sword and Shield's Dynamaxing lets just about any Pokemon go Big Mode, Gigantamaxing lets some Pokemon go Special Big Mode because of how they react with the Galar particles in the air or whatever. Suffice to say, they get big, but they also change forms, and that's what this video is all about. There are 32 Pokemon who have that special sauce and an ability to Gigantamax. That's a lot to review, or it would be, if not for two facts. First of all, since Dynamaxing was banned in singles, we only need to talk about VGC. Second, all that Gigantamaxing does, other than lodging a plane in your stomach or whatever, is change one of your max moves. Thing is, a lot of those max moves were worse than the regular alternatives. All bad Gmax mons fall into three categories. First, there were Pokemon who were seeing some use, but who preferred to be a regular Dynamax over Gmax. Maybe the best case of this is Corviknight. While Gmax Wind Rage's built-in defog sounds great for a support mon, it's really not worth maxing your Corviknight for, especially when you consider that the alternative is Max Airstream, arguably the best move in Sword and Shield. Other Pokemon that fit this bill, in order of their actual usage, were Duraludon, Gengar, and Dreadnought. Duraludon's Gmax depletion and its PP reducing effect are about as useful as actually using the move Spite. When Gengar had wreaked havoc by trapping opponents in the past, its sparse appearances in Gen 8 VGC were as a support, meaning it didn't want to Dynamax, and if it did, the defense drop from Max Phantasm was more useful. Finally, Dreadnought was a very bad pick, all things considered, but when it was used, it was as a rain sweeper, and Gmax Stone Surge's ability to set up rocks was much less useful than potentially gaining weather control. You'll notice that a few of those moves have effects that might have been useful in singles. Game Freak did a good job of making different effects for all of the different max moves, but the fact that we only saw them in VGC meant some of their effects sadly were relegated to an unfavorable format. Speaking of unfavorable format, the next category is Pokemon who are already bad and who also had a Gmax move worse than the regular alternative. Maybe a good max move could have boosted these Pokemon into relevance. Unfortunately, Game Freak seemed to really prefer saving the good moves for the Pokemon who are already good, and saddled this lot with moves like Flapple's Gmax Tartness. Special mention goes to Machamp, who really got the short end of the stick. You see, regular fighting and poison max moves had a base power nerf in this game to prevent snowballing, because they boosted your attack and special attack, respectively. But Champ's Cheese Strike only boosted crit rate, so you'd think he might be able to circumvent that need and fire off massively powerful max moves while running some sort of crit stacking strategy. But for some reason, Game Freak still applied the base power nerf to moves that turned into Cheese Strike instead of Knuckle, making it a definitively worse move. Other Pokemon in this category also include Appletun, Eevee, Copperajah, and the definitely worst Gmax mon of all time, Gmax Meowth. Finally, we have the bad Pokemon with good max moves. These are the saddest suckers of all. Pokemon who actually had potentially strong max moves, but who simply couldn't hack it because of their stats. Garbodor is a bit of an edge case here. Gmax Malador's poison effect isn't really that strong in the VGC format, and like Machamp, it suffers from the base power nerf applied to poison moves, but it is arguably an upgrade over Max Ooze simply because Garbodor couldn't make use of the special attack boost. We mentioned Scorch earlier because Sajin used it a bit, but it honestly belongs here along with the other trap-setting Gmax mon Sandaconda. Their moves set Fire Spin and Sand Tomb, which sounds really nice for the residual damage and trapping effect, but these two were just not good enough to justify using. And to be honest, Max Flare and Max Quake were probably better in a lot of cases anyway. Next is Gmax Orbeetle, who has one of the coolest max moves for its ability to set gravity. Again, it's debatable whether this is actually better than setting Psychic Terrain, but it's not like you ever get a chance to find out, because then you'd have to Gigantamax your Orbeetle, which no one was trying to do. And then there's the saddest Maxmon of all, the one who could have been royalty, but instead was relegated to be a lowly pauper. Gigantamax Kingler's Foam Burst was an incredibly powerful move. While it didn't set rain, it did lower both opponents' speed stats by 2 stages, providing truly oppressive speed control. That sounds like just what Kingler needs. It's already got a great attack stat, and being able to move first patches up the problem of its 70 speed. 3 problems: this ability and these 2 numbers. Normally, Kingler owes a huge amount of its power to sheer force, which doesn't work when maxed. Hypercutter is an okay alternative, but it feels really bad to lose out on that much damage. The bigger problem though is that Kingler is liable to get one-hit KO'd by the static shock you get from touching a doorknob in the wintertime. Its truly pitiful special bulk meant that the most frequent resulting of maxing it was getting to see the Dynamax knockout animation sooner than expected. Oh, and there's one more Gmaxmon who actually never saw any use at all, for one simple reason: Melmetal, because it wasn't allowed in competition. Hey, technically it's the worst out of all of these. And that's it. We tried to mix things up a little, and of course, that means there are some great possibilities for more within this subject area. Forums are, of course, not obligated to make a Pokemon better, but it feels rational that it should at least be a lateral move of sorts, or an alternative way to use a Pokemon. Let us know if you have any suggestions in this regard for us to cover in the future, and we'll see you next time. Thanks for watching, everyone. As always, if you liked the video and you want to see more, be sure to subscribe to False Swipe Gaming for more weekly Pokemon content, and thank you so much to our patrons for continued support of our videos, and thank you to everyone else watching as well. And thank you so much to our Platinum patrons. Thank you to Amphozenus, Alex Sable, Anthony Belval Renault, Bingleton, Daniel Isbeast, Dr. Mint, Funky, Glitcherton, Howl, Nurse Jake, Jack G, Lord of the Rabbit, Pretzel SP, Ray Ray, Skylaria, Soares and Croxon, Shiwei Miji, Stoneface Colin, and Quetzalcoatl Northropi for their major support of our videos. And follow my crew on these social media platforms. And that's all I got. See you next time, everyone.